Good afternoon. Welcome to the Center for Disaster Philanthropy webinar, Disaster Philanthropy in Native Americans, Practical Tips for Funding on and Off Reservations. I am John T. Cooper, Jr., Assistant Vice President for Public Partnership and Outreach at Texas A&M University in College Station, Texas. I also serve as the Chair of CDP's Advisory Council. This webinar is co-sponsored by Change Philanthropy, the Council on Foundations, Giving Compass, Native Americans in Philanthropy, Philanthropy New York, the Funders Network, and United Philanthropy Forum. Some reminders before we get started. We are recording this webinar, and after the webinar is complete, you can find it on the CDP website and YouTube channel. Today, you will have access to Zoom created captions, but we'll have more accurate captions in the recording. You can submit questions at any time during the webinar using the Q&A box, and we will answer them at the end of the panel presentation. If you're on Twitter, please use the hashtag CDP4Recovery. That's CDP, the number 4 recovery, to share and join the discussion. There will be a short survey at the end of this webinar. Please complete the survey to help us improve our webinar offerings to better meet your needs. CDP starts all webinars with a land acknowledgement to recognize the original stewards of the land where we live and work. In the spirit of healing and on behalf of CDP, I acknowledge and honor the original people of the land where I am located, which is about an hour north and slightly west of Houston, Texas. For many generations, this region has been a meeting and exchange site that Indigenous communities have lived on and been connected to. This includes the Tonkawa, the Tawakani, the Waco, the Sana, Wichita, and Kauai-Witikan peoples. We recognize the ways in which Indigenous peoples have been displaced and disfranchised from the land, not just by natural or environmental disasters, but by socioeconomic and cultural disasters caused by colonialism. We must also acknowledge the colonization of philanthropy and data and consider ways it can be decolonized. We honor the elders, past and present, as well as future generations. Despite centuries of colonial theft, violence, and injustice, Indigenous people are still here today, demonstrating innumerable talents and gifts while resisting continued oppression. This snapshot to frame Indigenous history was developed by Jeanette I. Sheath of the New Chinook First Nations in British Columbia, one of the Pacific Northwestern tribes. She says it traces the ways in which colonial oppression and discrimination have affected Indigenous people in Canada, the First Nation Métis and Inuit communities. From the early days when settlers first exposed Indigenous peoples to new diseases, sometimes deliberately, wiping out large portions of the population, to the current overrepresentation of Indigenous people who are incarcerated or experiencing homelessness, this snapshot explains the different structural issues that have caused systemic discrimination. You may have heard about the recent discoveries of unmarked graves of children buried outside residential schools in Canada. These schools operated in Canada from the late 1800s until 1996. 1996. There's not a single Native person in Canada who is not a survivor or the descendant of a survivor of residential schools. I think it is important to share some additional framing information. And this information comes from Investing in Native Communities, the Investing in Native Communities website, a philanthropic data tracking partnership between Candid and Native Americans in philanthropy. We'll hear from an NAP speaker shortly who can further expand upon the data, but for now, here are a few things to note. First, Native people are a richly diverse group of people. They represent more than 600 tribal nations and 175 languages across the United States. Tribal groups share similar experiences, but they have unique cultures with unique histories. Being Native is not just a race or an ethnicity. There are 574 federally recognized tribes with the political status of sovereign governments. Members of federally recognized tribes are dual citizens, both of their tribal nations and of the US. The American Indian Alaska Native population is on the rise. There are 6.8 million American Indian Alaska Natives in the United States, representing 2% of the population. And by 2060, that population is expected to constitute 2.5% of the total US population. Most American Indians, Alaska Natives, live outside reservations. In 2010, 78% lived outside tribal areas. From 1977 to 2007, more than 1 million American Indians and Alaska Natives moved to metropolitan areas, some by choice and unfortunately, some by force. Native Americans are greatly underfunded by philanthropy. From 2002 to 2016, large US foundations gave on average 0.4% of their total annual funding to Native American communities and causes. Funding for Native American communities and causes significantly dropped following the last recession. And although grant dollars have increased since that recession, giving is still at a lower level than before the recession. 20% of large foundations give to Native American communities and causes, but even in this select group, most give only 1 or 2 grants. So there's a need for more funders to be engaged in a meaningful and intentional way to address this persistent underinvestment. Of the grant dollars that go to Native communities and causes, most is for program support, approximately 56%, while only 15% goes to general operating support, unfortunately. That is, general operating support is often viewed as essential for Native-led organizations to have the flexibility and autonomy to achieve their missions. Okay, now it is my honor to introduce the panel members with us today, and I look forward to the information that they will share with us. Heidi Schultz is CDP's Program Manager, Early Recovery Fund, Tribal Communities Disaster Recovery. Her previous disaster-related work includes disaster response at our local chapter of the American Red Cross and recovery through Lutheran Social Services of South Dakota. Heidi has 23 years of fundraising, public relations, and management experience in the nonprofit sector. And she's worked in a variety of subsectors from the arts to health care to her 11 years in philanthropy. Jesselyn Keziah is a member of the Lumbee tribe and a Master of Social Work who currently serves as the Community Engagement Program Officer at the American Indian Center at the University of North Carolina, Chapel Hill. She has spent the last decade working in community development and philanthropy with a particular focus on food justice in rural BIPOC communities. Don Nickerbacher belongs to the Anishinaabe White Earth Nation and is an activist, advocate, organizational strategist, land and water defender, and leader in the philanthropic sector. She spent over 20 years of her life as a grassroots organizer on the front lines of some of the most critical battles for comprehensive equity and the elimination of institutionalized oppression. She sounds like a superhero. But wait, last week she was promoted to Vice President of the Development and External Engagement at Native Americans in Philanthropy. Congratulations to you, Don, by the way. And I should say welcome to all of you and thank you for taking time away from your busy schedules to be with us today. I want to start with a question for Don. Don, as I shared, Native Americans in Philanthropy did some research on the amount of funding given to Indigenous programming, and we know BIPOC organizations are traditionally underfunded. What could funders do to change this?
Thank you so much, John. Yeah, I have a slide here I'd like to point people to. And also I'd like to point listeners to the Native Americans in Philanthropy tool that you referenced earlier and some of the Native 101. In this tool, you'll see how important it is to change some of the false narratives about Native people. For instance, the idea that we are a shrinking population or that we only exist in the past. Or if you listen to some of the media channels, there's an invisibility issue. We've also found that for foundations and when people are working with Native communities and philanthropy, what people know about Natives is based on what they've learned in their elementary education, which inherently points to the past, when we are truly a contemporary culture. You also pointed out earlier that we are richly diverse. We share similar experiences with colonization, of course, but when you're engaging through a Native lens, then you're allowing Native people to tell their own stories, which are incredibly diverse from coast to coast. In our own origin stories, we have power and strength and resilience. And yes, we've lost a lot. We've lost language, culture, heritage, land, our children. But we're still here and we are thriving and we have a story to tell about how we are reconnecting and continuing to protect Mother Earth. And finally, investing in Native-led solutions, which are incredibly innovative across many sectors, from youth to outdoor education, climate justice, environmental solutions, land, health, economic development. There are innovations in all of these areas that are Native-led. In our work at NAP, we currently have a portal where you can see some information about who's doing this work in Indian country. So thank you for the opportunity to say this, John. I'll pass it back to you.
And thank you for that perspective and starting us off to set the stage for the conversation. Let me go to Heidi. So Heidi, CDP has been running its Native American and tribal communities recovery program for a couple of years now. Tell us about that program and the work you do.
Sure, thanks, John. Well, at CDP, we work on disaster recovery, and the program that I'm working with works with Native communities in the 3 states that you can see on the map on your screen if you're on a computer or your phone. And there are 23 Native nations in this region, and really our focus is on capacity building. So we grant to local organizations and hire people from their communities to lead and coordinate the recovery efforts, to do things like needs assessments and case management, volunteer coordination, and coordinate construction, kind of things you would see in a long-term recovery group structure. And excuse me, and communities may also want to focus on needs of children, perhaps mental health, education, outreach, and spiritual support. So a lot of times we'll help stand up a long-term recovery group, working with local leadership, and we'll provide technical assistance and training. I think one of the really important pieces of what we do is to make introductions and connections between the folks in that local community and other organizations that can help, and philanthropy, so that they can work to meet the unmet needs in the community as they assess their needs and get really organized for recovery. And what's maybe unique about the work that we do with Native communities is those communities and the challenges Native peoples face. And Dawn alluded to some of these. So especially when we work with communities on what we call reservations in this part of the country. So prior to even being impacted by a natural or environmental disaster, there is food insecurity, lack of housing, substandard housing, and a lack of infrastructure or kind of damaged infrastructure. And then those conditions are exacerbated by a disaster. Then let's look at the last year and a half and add the challenges of COVID. And you just can't separate out the impact of COVID from whatever disaster that community is working on. Communities can't focus on fixing roofs or mold remediation if they're hungry and families are tripled up in homes. So we partner to learn about food insecurity, food distribution, and food pantries, and how existing organizations are working to meet food needs in rural, remote, Native communities. I learned a lot. I met a lot of different people. I worked with partners to broker semi-trucks full of donated food and supplies, like palletfuls of hand sanitizer and cleaning supplies and wipes. I learned more than I want to about trucking. But what I really learned is that I am honored and humbled to work with people who are so resilient. And while it's appalling of what some of these people and their multiple generations of their families have endured, some of the things that Dawn mentioned before, the genocide, the boarding schools, the forced assimilation, the relocations, confinement to reservations, and really the continued inequities and colonization that's happening today, it has made these folks really resilient. It's just amazing. And I get to work with people who are resilient and creative and have a strong will to persevere to help their relatives and their communities to recover. Thanks, John.
Thank you for that overview. I have another question for you later, and I got to tell you, I can't wait to see your collection of trucker hats. But for now, let me get Jesselyn in the mix. So Jesselyn, at CDP, we often say all funders are disaster funders. Is this true for funding in the Indigenous community?
Thank you so much for having me and for this question. The answer is absolutely yes. I love that saying. When we had our conversation, I loved hearing you say that because it's so true. I had never heard it said so simply, and it's absolutely the same in Indigenous communities and in Native issues. All funders fund Indigenous issues, no matter what it is that you are working on, whether it's disaster funding, whether it's environmental, educational, housing, food, environment, climate change, youth work, senior care, all of those things are issues that are very central to Indigenous communities, and that we already have amazing Native-led community-based responses on the ground, both led from within tribal governments themselves and also in urban Indian centers like the one that I work out of, which is based out of the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill, and then out of regional centers. All funders fund Indigenous issues, and all funders can and should fund Indigenous-led work and Indigenous-centered work. It's really just a matter of making the relationship and taking the intentionality to know who is doing this work from a Native perspective and centering Native people in your community. And like I said, making that relationship to be able to support and build the work that's already there. And I'll say, you know, unfortunately, our communities have really had to stay internal and take care of ourselves and take care of our own for a long time. And so really in the world of philanthropy, it's a matter of people with power in philanthropy making those steps to make those relationships and connections to build that bridge.
Thank you, Jesselyn. And Dawn, let me go back to you. I'm reminded about something you said in the planning call. You said philanthropy is giving to specific areas, and we have to resist the notion that these areas of interest are white-led. Indigenous knowledge has been here since time immemorial. Can you expand on that and describe how funders should be shifting the power relationships within communities?
Oh, can you hear me? Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, thank you, John. Yes, I absolutely did say that. We know that philanthropy was built off of the enrichment of people who came here, and you know, they used the land in order to enrich themselves, and so a lot of that money coming back should be coming back into the hands of Indigenous people. And we also know that we are seeing that philanthropy has a lot of silos built into their giving. For instance, they might give to an environmental cause, but the Indigenous solution incorporates building power for women and networks of youth as a way to protect the environment. So generally speaking, and I've heard others here speak about this, a lot of Native-led solutions are holistic in nature. And they address the planet's most critical issues. And so when you're talking about a community-based solution, we often have this phrase about 7 generations, and we talk about what happens today, and our decisions today are affecting people 7 generations into the future. The past, present, and future is always present in those types of critical decisions and programming in a lot of the Native-led initiatives I've worked with and have supported. And as Heidi mentioned, it's really important to invest in capacity, technical assistance, and all of that that is included in that trust relationship. We have, as Native people, experienced a lot, but we also have solutions, and not just for ourselves, but for the planet. We've been the caretakers since time immemorial. And for instance, our languages have solutions for how we can protect and sustain communities in harmony with Mother Earth. And then secondly, sovereignty and self-determination. That means that Indigenous people have the right and the authority to govern and make decisions on behalf of their people. And this is important that funders respect that framework and that they are creating that respect with the sovereign nations. And as Jocelyn said, we're not just on reservations, but we're also leaders in urban spaces. And then the other thing that philanthropy can address is representation within their own organizations. On their board of directors or with program officers within their organizations, we at NAP, we support a Native Program Officers Working Group that is currently a grassroots kind of group that has formed organically of Native American people who are working within the philanthropic sector. And it's really important to bring more Native people into the sector so that we can actually be a part of the solution and have access to these funds. So with that, I'll send it back to you, John.
Thank you again, Dawn. Heidi, Dawn just referenced your work in her response. And so I want to have you say a little bit more about what you do. So thinking about shifting in power, yeah, I heard one of your grants took almost a year to get to the proposal stage, and which seems like a really long time to wait as a funder. So why did you invest that amount of time, and why is it important for other funders to follow your example?
Sure. Well, the damage that the storms had caused didn't go away. So, there was still a need. And we just had to find a way to help and build the relationships to really be able to partner in a manner that worked for the people there. So the project I'm thinking about is Cheyenne River. Beautiful, beautiful area in South Dakota. You can just see prairie for miles in every direction. But in that beauty is a suffering infrastructure, and boy, the hit that the homes took from not only the storms of 2019, but storm after storm after storm. So we started talking to a local champion, and it was really, it was January 2020. So I just started at CDP, and someone from the state BOAD was kind of helping them to get organized, put together a long-term recovery group, and suggested asking CDP for support. And that person was not Native and sort of managed the relationship and communications amongst us all. And that's not what I wanted. I wanted to build a relationship and visit with the local folks. And there was a main champion, a local gentleman named Harold. Hi, Harold, if you happen to be listening. And I can't wait to see you next week. I get to go out there. Again, it is just breathtaking. So, overall, it was typically about 2 to 3 weeks between each communication. But once I had kind of established the communications directly with Harold and the local folks, we kind of rebuilt the concept and drafted a budget and really worked together to design what this could look like. And the time it took, throw in COVID again, right, in that last year and a half, and not only just the strains it put on everyone in changing how we work, but it really put a strain on Harold's time, and he had added work over that time. So, eventually they did submit an application and increase the budget, and again, focusing on that local capacity building and hiring locally and not relying on non-Native folks to help or consult. So it got to the point where CDP was asking, Heidi, is this going to really happen? And I was always confident that the answer was going to be yes, and it was just a matter of when. And then we got to the point where we had to meet some expectations of our funders and get the proverbial money out the door, as funders say. So I asked for special permission to travel. We're still under a no travel. I have special permission next week again. I went there, met with the long-term recovery group board. We met outside on the powwow grounds, so we were fairly distanced and safe. Met with the organization's their fiscal agent, because it wasn't a 501c3. And we just got everything firmed up. We all got to meet each other, talk to each other. And I just always believed that an in-person discussion would make the difference, and it really did. And I'm not typically a patient person, but I've had to practice patience and really trying not to kind of put the colonialized world of, the confinement, the timelines, the deadlines on each community's process, because they should really lead the process, not us as funders, right? So they have to be ready to do this work and want to be ready and able to use the funds. So, do we invest more time? We do, especially, in this program. But we do that because we know that as funders, we need to take that time to build the relationships, build the trust, and have us be comfortable with that community and their leaders, and them to be comfortable with us, really in order for us to have, a comfortable and fruitful partnership. It took about 1.5 years.
So thank you for that. It sounds like you used an organic process and worked with the group on their terms, and that in turn, your patience resulted in a greater trust for working with the group, which feels like a theme that's emerging from this conversation. But we'll come back to that. So for now, let me ask a more direct question of Jessalyn. A more direct and practical question for you, I guess. So if a funder wants to connect with Indigenous people who live and work in urban centers, what do they do? How do they initiate those relationships?
Thank you so much, John. And this is a really important question, and something that in my current role working at the American Indian Center, I really deal with being that bridge between all of our tribal nations statewide here in North Carolina, and resources, funders, resources from the universities and from our systems. And I think that this has already been said a number of times, but just really recognizing we are still here. Native people are still here. Wherever you are, there are Native people around you. I feel like oftentimes we're really subjected to stereotypes about what Native people look like and where we live, or the idea, that we're only on reservations. And I'm thankful that that statistic has already come up, that 78% of us are living in urban areas or in areas outside of our tribal homelands. That's certainly the case for me, living up in the Triangle region of North Carolina. And we have up here an American Indian Center that serves, like I said, all of our tribal nations statewide, as well as our local community. We have a number of local organizations. We have here in North Carolina, we have urban Indian centers in all of our major cities and urban areas that are very active in providing resources for our community, our intertribal community, made up of people from representatives of many different tribal nations here in our urban areas. And so it really is as simple as looking around. And I've had conversations with people, funders looking in this area, how do I find, I know they're here, I know we're here, but how do we find them? And sometimes it's even as simple as Googling what are, if you're not familiar with the tribes, with the tribal nations in your area, then absolutely you need to be familiar with all of the tribal nations and the communities, the governments who are providing resources to their people in your area. And above and beyond that, recognize that there are urban Indian centers. Oftentimes we're called Indian centers or Native American centers, but it's really easy once you start intentionally looking. You can find where we have programming. And, there's some really beautiful lines in some books that I've read that have been written about just our being such a community-oriented people, that we, whenever we're moving away to areas outside of our tribal homelands, that we really make space to find each other, to start cultural programming, to start resources, knowing that that exists for us back home. And so really taking that with us wherever we go. So if you take just the simple steps of reaching out and figuring out who are the Native leaders in your community, who are the people, what are the hot button topics and issues, and if that's going to be, very different area to area, but taking it upon yourself to do a survey of the landscape and see who is here, who is doing work, what are the organizations, what are the individual leaders. And I'll say in many areas, once you can find someone to talk to, you can really follow that web out. I know in North Carolina, we have the largest number of Native Americans on the East Coast. But even with that, we're a tight-knit community. So if you find anyone who is really active in Native issues in North Carolina, we probably know the people who are active in all of the other tribal nations, in all of our intertribal spaces, in all of our urban Indian organizations. So once you start to build relationship, it becomes easier and easier to make those connections and to start to piece together the landscape of community that's there. I always use the word community because it really is what it is. We really are people who live and work and play and exist in community with each other and intentionally seek community. So once you start looking from that perspective of where are people in community and how do I be in community with them, right? It's easy to get it going. So thinking not only about the tribal territories, tribal nations, I am often talking to funders and they're like, okay, well, I know, I'm from the Lumbee tribe, for example. They're like, okay, well, I know that the Lumbees are in my area, but how do I reach out? Every tribal nation is a government, right? So they have a website, they have people who are there on hand, multiple different departments handling different issues. And so you can really find the people that you're looking for, elected tribal council members, you can really find that. In urban Indian organizations, oftentimes we're incorporated as 501c3s. And so, it's pretty easy to find once you start intentionally looking. And then in terms of getting in touch, I've talked with a number of funders who are like, I emailed a flyer about our upcoming deadline or our funding cycle, and I didn't really get a bite. I didn't get a response back. And so, I think they don't want to be in a relationship with us and, and kind of give up after that just initial email. And I really would push back against that idea and encourage you to think about relationship and be in relationship. I love what I think Heidi was saying about making the intentionality of in-person meetings. That is a really big deal. I know for the folks that I'm working with, really taking that time to actually be in relationship. What I always encourage people, funders to do is, you'll see, and of course, COVID has changed the landscape, but typically we have tons of events that are open to the public, whether it's powwows, whether it's health fairs, whether it's, just events, whether it's cleanup days, anything that you could come and attend to. And in person, you can start to see, who are the people in community that people are turning to, who are the leaders here, who is holding the conversation, and really building relationship. And really it comes down so much to relationship. I'm going to talk more about just the importance of that relationship there, but to sum this up, it really comes down to your intentionality of getting to know who's in your area. And then once you start that, you will find a whole world of community that's so deeply engaged. I think that's one of the feedback that I hear most often from our funders. And I've worked on all sides of the funding game, both for funding agencies and also in helping communities apply for funding. And what I hear time and time again, we're constantly having funders come to us after they give out their first round of funding to a Native organization or to a tribe and saying, what's the magic here? Because the community is so engaged around this programming, how do we learn lessons from this? And it really comes down to that deep community touch. So then my advice to you as a funder is come in with that spirit of community, come in with that spirit of relationship. And it really is down to relationship building like you would do with anyone else.
Very helpful. And I would love for Don to weigh in here. Don, in a more general way, let me ask, how should funders establish relationships with tribal communities? What say you to this?
Oh, thank you. Well, first, oh my gosh, what Jocelyn and Heidi both have said is just really powerful and so smart. I hope everybody's taking really copious notes. And I just want to echo what we've said. I have kind of a graphic here that shows kind of a cyclical relationship, and I'll break that down a little bit. first, in acting with respect and beyond acknowledging of community issues, foundations really need to sustain the relationships with stakeholders that are based on mutual learning, understanding, a desire to identify the solutions that are benefiting the community. You should definitely be asking about protocols, cultural gifts in exchange for time and information provided. A lot of Indigenous communities on both coasts have experienced, armies of anthropologists coming in and offering to help, but only taking information. And so there is a sense of weariness. And so engaging in that cultural practice of exchange is really important. Also, like Heidi mentioned, be patient. This is the reciprocity that we often speak about in funding. Second, know the Native communities you're engaging in. It's often said that we must first have a personal connection before we can engage in the big picture. So you need to show that you're interested in the community. And then third, be really committed to sustaining that relationship and growing in your progress. For philanthropy, this can mean multi-year funding, investing in capacity building or growth. And it can be, like was mentioned by both of my co-panelists, the better site visits, offering opportunities for training and development, introductions to other funders that you know or are in your network. And for an example, there's also sometimes an intentional silence during the days that are following the meetings. And this is seen as the proper protocol that I talked about earlier. And using this time to figure out your thoughts and to focus on your response. As my grandfather Duish used to say, 2 ears, 1 mouth, and we are listening twice as much as we speak. And then finally, engage in consensus-based decision-making. The active consensus is not linear or stagnant or a single step process. It's placing the good of the whole group above an individual preference. So allowing not just for diversity, for an example, but also the practice of inclusion. Deep inclusion means that people have the ability to not only share ideas, but also disagree, call something out, make decisions. And this is vital for the consensus, often called free, prior, informed consent with our communities. And so this should be like cyclical and ongoing work of inclusion of community perspective. Like consistent and regular communication, it will cultivate the trust and respect that's critical for establishing these long-lasting relationships. And it's really important to share with communities any reports or documents or your own internal policies or strategies, and make sure that feedback is always shared. I've heard from a number of different tribal leaders who have been frustrated when they're approached by somebody in philanthropy or not philanthropy, and asking and just doing kind of an asking session instead of having actual solutions brought with them, because our tribal leaders are incredibly busy. They have a lot on their plates and they need you to come prepared with solutions, not just there on information gathering. They're pretty tired of just information gathering. So I'll pass it back to you, John.
Thank you. And I'm hearing a lot from our panelists about the importance of respect and reverence and transparency, shared decision-making, and how things can backfire if you don't pay attention to those things. And so I'd love to hear a little bit more about that, maybe starting from Jesselyn. In the planning session, you talked about the importance of relationships and reciprocity. So why might there be some reluctance from Native Americans, Native communities to build meaningful relationships with philanthropy?
Thank you, John. And this is such an important topic. And I'll say, other than the word community, I think the 2 words that I say absolutely the most every single day are relationship and reciprocity, when talking about just our foundational values within Native community, but especially in giving advice to anyone, and especially funders, because it's so different, such a different world, to funders to really understand the value of relationship and reciprocity, and also recognize that those are not things that come immediately. That's not something that that's something that that's something that requires a lot of intentionality. And that's also where the value of it is held. And so really wanting to be, this is not something that's transactional. It's not something that can be, we've already talked about just the frustration of timetables. In Native community, we are really moving at the speed of relationship and really valuing reciprocity there. And so I think that's really important to bring, and also to recognize, I'll talk with funders all the time. And I remember even an organization that I worked for years ago, who had given its first funding to a tribal nation. And then, that project, it was such a small amount of funding. It was a few $1,000s. And then that project was absolutely plastered over the funding organizations, their website, their materials, shown at the board meeting as an example of, the diversity, equity and inclusion work that was happening. It was of such benefit to the funding organization to give funding to the Native community, right? It's not, that's not a one-way relationship. There's benefit on both sides. And so, and Dawn already mentioned just that in community, we're so used to researchers, anthropologists, universities, organizations, funders coming in with the offer of resources, or the offer of, oh, I'm doing this project, it's so exciting and it'll benefit your community. But largely the benefit is actually to the researcher, the university, the organization that's coming in from the outside. It's more extractive to our community. And so having a long history of that extraction, I think it's extra important for funders or anyone who's wanting to come in and wanting to do good work, coming in with good spirit, to really slow down and build relationship and recognize the reciprocity and the value that's there. So that's on the positive side. On the other side, there may be reluctance. And I've heard this from a number of funders. Like I said, I really work in a bridge position. And so I really have conversations on all sides. With tribal leaders, with funding organizations, with program officers, of which I am one of myself, right? And I've had so many program officers say, we reached out, we did all this work, we did our research, we wanted to come into community, we reached out, and we didn't get a response back, or it seems like there's reluctance to open up, or it seems like, and I always invite them to really think about that, and really think about the power dynamics that are at play, and really think about the history that's at play, right? As Indigenous people, we have seen from day one all of the stories that have played out on this land and through this country's history, right? As people of oral tradition, we really carry these stories. I'll tell you, I met one of my elders in a parking lot a few weeks ago to buy a piece of art from him. And he told me a story that started, he said, in 1703. Okay, that's the context that he set for the story that he told me. So we really are holding these long histories. And then, so when you think about all of the wealth that's been built, that now is being, given out from philanthropy, from these funding organizations, where is that money from? Where is that wealth built from, right? And when we're talking about that being built from our land that was taken, or from industries that were really extractive, I'm thinking, for example, in our area, there's a number of large foundations that's wealth comes from the history of tobacco in North Carolina, right? Which is obviously an incredibly painful history for many people. So when those program officers show up, very eager with these names on their shirt, with these names on their email addresses, we have direct relationship with those families, right? With the ex family who now has amassed so much wealth that they have a philanthropy organization out of it. We were here when they were starting to build their wealth. So then for, a couple of 100 years later, for that to come back around, and now we're asked, do you want to apply and jump through all of these hoops for, for a small amount of funding that can only be used in XYZ way? There might be hesitation to enter in relationship based on the history, based on the fit, also just recognizing tribal self-determination, tribal sovereignty, the priorities that are happening in community may not fit really neatly with the lined up priorities of your organization. And so really just respecting where people are at, and then instead, recognizing relationship. And again, I'm thinking about a trend that I've seen happen because a number of our tribal nations here are doing amazing work, and funders have become more and more interested, starting to develop some relationship there. And we have some communities that are, they want to see what happens. They're like, well, we've never been, these funders have never funded us before. And I've heard some painful stories about what has played out in other circumstances. So they want to see it. They want to see someone else go through the process first. And so we've had one tribal nation in particular who has kind of been the first one to enter in relationship with larger and larger funders. And then, like I said, when that goes really well, when the funding organization comes back and says, we've never seen a community so engaged around this project, how do we support you more, and kind of go back and forth, then our other tribal nations can look and see, okay, well, they are actually working in relationship, and there's mutual benefit that's happening all around. It seems like it's being done in a good spirit. Now we're more willing to enter in relationship. So this really can be a long game, even when you're talking about, it took a year for that one grant to come to fruition in a proposal. To me, I'm like, that timeline seems entirely reasonable. And I've seen timelines that have taken a lot longer, but then in the patience of actually working and building relationship, the rewards that pay off in the long term are also so much bigger. And the work continues to grow. So relationship and reciprocity, I'll say it again, just really, I put a heart there, keep those words in your heart. And then when you sense that there may be reluctance, I would just really adopt a really open mind, and even start to have some conversations. Is it tied to, I know that in our area, we had a pipeline coming through, and then there was some kind of like spinoff money that was available for that. But for our community, it was like, well, we don't want to apply to that money because it's tied to this same, project that's ultimately hurting our community. So whenever there's reluctance, I would just adopt an open mindset and just lean into that with an open spirit of questioning. And then if you really are coming from a place of right relationship and wanting to be in good relationship, then trust that you can move forward with intentionality.
Thank you for sharing that. We're about to move into the question and answer session in a second. I see we have 3 questions already in the Q&A box, but I've got to squeeze in one last question for Heidi. Building on what Jessamine just said, it seems like there could be fear in some Indigenous communities that a funder might invest in only one project, and then that one project becomes the poster child for how good they are doing as a funder. So while the investment makes sense for the funder, it looks good for the funder, it may not meet the needs of the tribe or the organization. So my question is, when you are making grants, what is the process you use to make sure your grants are serving the needs of the community as well as CDP's needs?
Yeah, so kind of building on what Jessamine just was saying is that open-spirited questioning and listening. So I'll tell you a super quick story about Wombliska Society, which is actually, it's a drumming society out in Rapid City, South Dakota. So we were introduced to them through another grantee partner that serves, the tribal nations out on the reservations across several states in 19 tribes. And their question to us was, well, who's helping natives, living in the urban areas? And Rapid City in South Dakota has a fairly large native population. And so we started just talking to them. Well, what are the needs? Well, let me introduce you to some folks. So we started attending meetings and just listening and learning, well, what are you doing now? What are your strengths? What do you wish you could be doing? They were just doing amazing things with no money. It was, everybody was volunteering their time, and it just, they're doing amazing work with very, very little. And so we kind of said, well, what would you do? What could you do if you had some grant funds? And we just listened, and then we kind of had to, translate it to grantees, grant proposalees, I'm going to say, and kind of make it fit into the boxes. So, bottom left, you see, so these are some young men on a travel basketball team, and that's the thing, right? You used to do these travel tournaments. Well, these boys, had never done any such thing. I don't think our funds funded this, but our funds helped fund that gentleman in the middle, Chris. And his father actually started Wombliska just as a drum society, really to help the youth. And they've done so much more than that. They do a lot of basketball tournaments. They do a lot of feeding of the community. They started, with our help, a food pantry. We, again, built capacity for them, with them, allowing them to hire some people. The upper right-hand corner shows a drum group. So it's a mix of adults and youth, and they're learning, they're practicing, they're learning more about their culture, and then the kids in the background are practicing, dance. And they worked really hard over the last couple of years, and that desire for community is just, I liked how Jessalyn was talking about that, and it just made so much that intentionality of seeking community. They started a youth center in the kind of the part of the city where a lot of Native folks live. And we didn't help with the building. That's not things we can fund, but we could sure help with having their COVID disaster recovery be housed out of that building, and the food pantry being housed out of that building, and help pay for some staffing and office space and phone and internet and all that kind of good stuff. So, we listened, and then we kind of tried to fit into what they were doing instead of, I think, what you typically see from funders is the other way around. And one of the persons on the meetings is a vicar, and he's with their partner church, which this youth center is right next to a native Lakota, a Lakota native Lutheran church. Very interesting. And he was just like, at one of the meetings, he said, "Hey, is anybody writing any of this stuff down? Because this is pretty crazy stuff. People listening to us, and they want to help us. They want to do what we want to do." And I was kind of happy and sad at that moment. Like, it's sad that was new and kind of astonishing to us all. But I was glad that I was in that moment and part of that. And they're just doing amazing things. And that's, I think, our job is to give that capacity, help them kind of organize where they want to go, and sit back and watch and cheer.
So thank you, Heidi. I want to see if we can get a couple of questions from our audience in the time we have left before I have to wrap up. And so, Heidi, don't go anywhere. I'm about to put you on the spot. Actually, I want to direct the first question to you. This is from Dr. Clarence Hall. Yes, are there plans to extend your support to other states? Currently, he works with tribal nations in Arizona, Nevada, in the Western Pacific territories in California that have similar needs. Did I say Nevada? Right. Somebody correct me. Heidi.
Someone I would say Nevada, because I'm a Midwesterner, and it's probably wrong. So somebody from Nevada will correct you. So possibly, we're talking about that, and we aren't self-funded, so it depends on us raising more money to go more places. The one thing that we've really talked about is partnering with our domestic disaster recovery fund in, should some kind of a weather-related environmental disaster happen, in tribal communities, is definitely partnering to kind of utilize me and relationships and my knowledge to go hand in hand with kind of the very specific and disaster expertise that CDP overall has. So wait and see is, I guess, my answer. I hope, and we're thinking and talking about it and raising money to do just that. So stay tuned.
Fair enough. That'll have to do for now. Another question from Angela, and she's not directing this question to anyone in particular, so maybe Jessalyn or Dawn, maybe you'll take it. The question is, what practices are being used now to decrease food deserts, usually leading to high levels of diabetes and other illnesses among Native people, primarily in reservations? Jessalyn or Dawn?
Yeah, I'd be happy to speak to this. This is an area where I've worked specifically for the last 10 years. And I'll say our tribe, in terms of this, I've worked statewide with all different communities on aspects of food insecurity, food deserts, food justice, restoring local food systems. Our tribal nations are truly leading that work because of, here we're a very agricultural people, and there's been really powerful work coming out of our tribal nations around meeting the food needs of their community, not only their native community, reaching that abundance and living in this giving spirit all the way around. So I'll tell you an example of the Coharie tribe, which is one of our smaller tribes in the state, about 3,000 people. They have a community garden. When you hear the word community garden, you may have an idea of what that is. Theirs is, I think this year they were on 12 acres of vegetables, and then they have a few different acres of specific crops, sorghum, corn, and they grow and give out thousands of pounds of food to their community. That's something that it's farmers from in the community who are running it, who have always just lived this way of growing and sharing with each other. But we just had the Coharie potato harvest about a week ago, and there were, I don't know how many, 30,000 pounds of potatoes given out all the way around to community. And I'll say, just in terms of funding, so often we have a hard time putting on paper and putting into these boxes the methods for how things happen. But I'll tell you that I was with one of the tribal leaders after the harvest who was calling around to all of the elders' houses to see, who needs potatoes that we can get potatoes out to. And this was shortly after we left the field, and it was hard to find someone who hadn't already been approached by somebody else in the community bringing food to them. So what I'm saying in this is that just the community networks are so strong, the networks of communication, the networks of mobilization, that things happen so rapidly because of that deep-seated sense of community. And I'd be happy, the person who asked about food systems, I'd be happy to have any kind of follow-up conversation about what that's looking like in Indian country, because I would say across all of our tribal nations, food sovereignty is one of the issues that I consistently see really powerful work happening in.
Justin, your offer is a good segue. Thank you for that. I see that.
Just to echo what
Go ahead.
You were talking about the Native American Food Sovereignty Alliance is a really great organization who has been connecting a lot of different of these opportunities from the Indigenous Seed Keeper Network and food and culinary mentorship programs, and then Native led food and farming practices with the Agricultural Council. There's just a number of national organizations that are working to reconnect the pathways and the trade pathways throughout Indian country. And it seems like Native people know about this work, but I think more and more we need to let the general public know that we are taking the land back, the ownership and the responsibility back. And I just am so happy that we have so many experts here on this panel who've been working for it toward this end for so long. I'll pass it back to you, John.
Thank you, Dawn, for chiming in. And I was about to say, I see a number of questions popping up in the Q&A box, and there were some questions submitted to us in advance of this webinar. Unfortunately, we are out of time. But there will be a way for you to get your question answered later, and I will say more about that. But for now, let me begin the wrap up. And I want to do that by providing the audience with some key takeaways from our conversation. For starters, philanthropy is often a transactional relationship. This doesn't work in tribal communities, particularly because of the history of colonialism and systemic discrimination. So focus on building strong, deep relationships with your grantees and their communities. Work to shift power. Next, trust in tribal self-determination and tribal sovereignty. When working with Native Americans, you are often dealing with sovereign governments, not a typical non-governmental organization. Understand the differences. Work to enhance their existing knowledge, build and help leverage their capacity. Third, building relationships may need to include reconciliation. Much of the wealth in this country was built off the indigenous land. Humble yourselves as funders and acknowledge the harm that may have been done to generate your foundation's assets. 4, Native Americans are in every place in every sector. No matter the activities you fund, there are Native peoples within those programs and communities. Think about how to enhance funding to provide outreach and additional supports to meet their unique needs. One more, give Indigenous knowledge and wisdom the credit it is due. We often rely on white-led organizations to solve problems Native communities have grappled with since time immemorial. Environmentalism, homelessness, stewardship of land and water, et cetera, are just a few of the areas where we should respect the wisdom of tribal communities and lean toward Native-led organizations for direction and support. As our panelists have shared, there will be need for assistance with recovery efforts for years to come. CDP has many resources, including several funds devoted to disaster philanthropy that can assist you. The issue insights provide an introductory look at disasters and responses. There are recordings of past webinars you can view. Disaster profiles provide regular information about the impact of disasters and the needs of communities, which can inform philanthropy and how it can help. CDP staff are always available to provide guidance, and if you need more in-depth assistance, they provide a variety of consulting services. You can find more information about CDP's work at disasterphilanthropy.org. To those of you considering disaster response funding, CDP has many additional resources, promising strategies, and useful information in the Disaster Philanthropy Handbook. You can find it at disasterplaybook.org. The next webinar, please join CDP on August 12th at 2 p.m. Eastern for our next webinar. The topic will be Best Practices in Disaster Philanthropy, the importance of long-term recovery groups. We like to keep these webinars to an hour, and we're out of time for today, so we must bring this one to a close out of respect for everyone's time. I want to say thanks again to our co-sponsors, Change Philanthropy, the Council on Foundations, Giving Compass, Native Americans in Philanthropy, Philanthropy New York, the Funders Network, and United Philanthropy Forum. Special thanks to Don, Jesselyn, and Heidi for taking their time to share their insights with us. And again, if your questions or thoughts were not addressed in today's webinar, you may email them to Tanya at Tanya-Garcia at disasterphilanthropy.org. Thank you and have a wonderful afternoon.